Tokyo was a city that never slept, but it did know how to dream, and tonight it dreamed in rain. The monsoon had been falling for 6 days without rest, turning the neon-lit streets into trembling rivers of color. Headlights smeared across wet asphalt, umbrellas bloomed and wilted like strange dark flowers, and somewhere, beneath it all, Leena moved quickly, as if walking through a memory she didn't trust. The air smelled of wet metal and the faint musk of old train tracks. She could hear the hiss of tires on rain-slicked roads, the distant rumble of a late train, and above it all, the steady drip, drip, drip of water sliding from the edge of her hood. Leena was on her way to work, her navy blue nurse's scrubs hidden under a long, waterproof coat. The fabric clung damply to her knees despite the coat's protection. She had learned quickly in Tokyo's monsoon season, nothing stayed truly dry. Not your shoes, not your hair, not your heart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, not the usual soft vibration of a text, but the deep, persistent hum of a call. She pulled it out, thumb already prepared to silence whatever wrong number or scam call it was, but her fingers froze when she saw the name on the glowing screen. Aisha, mobile, her sister's name, her sister's number, her sister, who had been missing for 8 months. The ring pulsed in her palm, the sound dampened by the rain but deafening in her mind. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She watched the screen until it faded to black, her reflection faint in the wet glass, and her pulse thundering against her ribs. The call log would show it later, as always. Missed call, 0:23, the time of the ring, the same time it always came. Every night, Leena slipped the phone back into her pocket and forced herself forward. She had a shift to start, and shifts meant 12 hours in the fluorescent-lit underbelly of Tokyo General Hospital, where there was no space for ghosts. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and boiled coffee. Its white walls were tired with the scuffs of countless stretchers. The night ward was quiet in the way only hospitals can be. A hush filled with the beeping of monitors, the slow shudder of the ventilation system, and the occasional muffled sob from a room down the hall. Leena had been here for 3 years. Night shifts suited her in a way daylight never had. People expected smiles in the sun. At night, they only wanted efficiency. And she was efficient, quicker than most, calmer than most. But calmness wasn't the same as peace. She signed in, tucked her coat into her locker, and tied her hair back into a no-nonsense knot. Her reflection in the locker's dented metal door looked pale under the overhead light, her eyes faintly shadowed, as if sleep had been avoiding her for years. At the nurse's station, Hana, the youngest of the night nurses, was sipping a canned latte like it was a lifeline. "You hear the rain's not stopping until next week?" Hannah said without looking up from her tablet. Leena gave a small smile. Tokyo wouldn't be Tokyo without a flood warning. They moved through the shift's rhythm. Blood pressure checks, IV drips, whispered conversations with patients who couldn't sleep. Leena's hands were steady, even when her mind wasn't. She had learned to lock the restless parts of herself in some mental backroom, only letting them out on the walk home. But sometimes, they leak through, like now. Room 407's patient, an elderly woman with pneumonia, reached for Leena's wrist while she was adjusting the oxygen tube. "You're cold," the woman murmured, her eyes glassy with fever. "Who are you waiting for?" Leena paused. The rain tapped harder against the window. "No one," she said softly. The woman smiled faintly, as if she knew better. By the time her shift ended, the sky was still bruised with night. Tokyo's streets gleamed with the reflection of half-lit billboards. Leena stepped outside into the rain, pulling her hood tight. The streets at 6 a.m. were in a strange in-between. The last of the nightlife drifting away, the first of the morning rush stirring. That's when she saw him again. The motorbike. It was parked across the street under the shadow of an old vending machine awning, engine idling softly. The rider wore a black helmet and a rain poncho that flared slightly in the wind. She couldn't see his face. She never could. But she had started recognizing the way the head tilted slightly when she appeared. This was the 3rd night in a row. Leena's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She looked away quickly and began walking toward the station, pretending the wet air was the reason for her quickened breath. She didn't run. Running made people follow. The train ride home was half empty. A scattering of salarymen with damp briefcases, a student asleep against the window, the faint smell of wet wool coats. She sat in the corner seat, her bag pressed to her lap. Her phone lay like a weight in her coat pocket. She didn't want to check it, but when the train slowed for her stop, she pulled it out anyway. The notification glowed there, waiting. One missed call, Aisha, 0023. It should have been impossible. The police had told her the number was inactive, disconnected, but impossible things had a way of finding her. Her apartment was small, one room, kitchenette, and a balcony with a rusting railing. The rain on the metal made a sound like fingers drumming a table. She hung her coat, poured herself tea, and tried to push away the feeling of being watched. The phone lay on the counter. She stared at it. Then, before she could change her mind, she opened the call log and pressed the number. It rang once, twice, then nothing, not even voicemail. Just a dead silence that felt like the space between heartbeats. And in that silence, faint, but there, she heard breathing. Slow, steady, human. Her own breath caught. The line went dead. She stood in her kitchen, tea cooling between her hands, the city beyond her window pulsing with rain and light. Somewhere far below, an engine turned over. She stepped to the balcony just in time to see the motorbike ease out from the shadow of the next building and disappear into the wet dawn. The seventh night came with a heavier rain, the kind that blurred the edges of buildings and turned every streetlight into a trembling halo. Tokyo's city noise dulled beneath it, as if the rain itself were eavesdropping. Leena hadn't slept since the last call. Her dreams had turned into a mess of sound, the ringtone, the steady breathing, the faint growl of a motorbike under it all. She'd tried telling herself it was a coincidence, that maybe someone had found her sister's phone and was playing some cruel, inexplicable joke. But a coincidence didn't happen at exactly 00023 every night. It was Friday, technically her night off, but she'd agreed to cover for a colleague. The hospital was better than her apartment. Fluorescent lights didn't leave room for shadows. She took the train again, the hum of the carriage and the muffled chatter of passengers a thin comfort. The windows blurred with condensation, her own face ghosted against the glass. That's when she noticed the cab. Not a motorbike this time. A yellow cab idling at the far end of the street as she stepped from the station. The driver's face was hidden behind rain-speckled glass, but the headlights didn't move when she crossed in front of it. Leena's steps slowed. The passenger window rolled down halfway, and a voice cut through the rain. "You heading to Tokyo General?" She froze. The man in the driver's seat looked to be in his mid-30s, hair damp and curling at the edges, dark eyes steady but not unfriendly. His voice had that low, measured tone of someone used to night conversations. "I'm walking," she said, her voice cautious. The man nodded once, not pushing. "Name's Robert. I drive nights. Saw you a few times, thought you might want a ride before you drown." She looked at him properly now. There was a tiredness in his face that matched her own. The kind you didn't get from just lack of sleep, but from carrying too much. Still, she shook her head. "I'm fine." He didn't argue. The window slid back up, the cab's wipers swiped away a sheet of rain, and the car rolled slowly forward, turning off at the next corner. For a moment, she wondered if he was just being polite or watching her. The shift passed in a blur of dim corridors and restless patience. Around midnight, while she was adjusting a saline drip in room 412, the soft vibration in her pocket started again. Her throat tightened. She excused herself, stepped into the empty stairwell, and looked at the screen. Aisha. Mobile. 023. Leena stared at it until the call stopped. She didn't answer, not yet, but she saved the audio of the ringtone. A small act of control, though it felt like trying to catch rain with her hands. When she went back to the nurse's station, Hannah glanced up. "You okay? You look like you saw something." "Just tired," Leena lied. After the shift, the rain had eased to a drizzle. She stepped into the damp morning air, scanning the street out of habit. No motorbike this time. But halfway to the station, she saw the same yellow cab idling near the curb. The window came down again. "Still walking?" Robert asked. Something in his tone made her hesitate. Not pity, not pushiness. more like he understood what it meant to not want to go home alone. She slid into the back seat, her bag on her lap. The cab smelled faintly of stale coffee and the mint gum he was chewing. "You always work nights?" he asked, pulling into traffic. "Yes. You?" "Same. Less traffic, fewer people pretending to be sober." She almost smiled. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city passing in slick reflections. Then, at a red light, Robert glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You know you've been followed, right?" Her chest went tight. "What?" "That motorbike. Black helmet, rain poncho. I've seen it behind you at least 3 nights this week. Not tonight, though. Guess they're taking a break." Leena swallowed hard, her fingers curling in her lap. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Didn't want to spook you. Figured you knew." She looked out the window, trying to calm the hammering in her chest. Maybe he was lying, maybe he was the one behind it. But something in his voice felt steady. Not harmless, but steady. When they reached her building, he didn't drive off immediately. "Look," he said, "if you ever feel unsafe, just flag me down. I drive this route most nights." She nodded, stepping out into the damp air. The cab rolled away, its taillights smearing red across the wet street. She was halfway up the stairs to her apartment when she heard it. A motorbike engine. Slow, close. She froze, the key trembling in her hand. The sound passed beneath her balcony, pausing just long enough to be noticed. Then it faded into the early morning haze. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching the clock creep toward 23. When the phone rang, she answered. The first thing she heard was rain. Not the rain outside her own window. Heavier, more metallic, like water hitting a tin roof. Then, a voice. "Leena." Her breath caught. It was Aisha's voice. The line crackled, the syllables breaking. "Leena, don't trust." The call went dead. Her room felt smaller, the shadows heavier. She sat there long after the dial tone faded, her heart pounding in a way that told her the motorbike was the least of her problems. The next morning, Leena's apartment felt like a box someone had set adrift on a dark ocean. She didn't open the curtains. She didn't turn on the lights. Aisha's voice still echoed in her ears, the broken syllables, the urgency that felt like it was meant for this moment, not 8 months ago. Don't trust. Don't trust who? The police? Robert? Herself? The rain hadn't stopped, though it had thinned to a pale mist, the kind that coated everything but seemed invisible until it beaded on your skin. Leena moved through her morning as if underwater, every sound dulled. By late afternoon, she couldn't stay inside any longer. She needed air, or at least the illusion of it. She threw on her coat and headed toward the station, the streets shimmering under the weak glow of late-day neon. Tokyo General's night shift was quieter than usual, the rain muting the city's restlessness. Around 10 p.m., Leena stepped into the break room, her tea cooling on the counter as she stared at her phone. No messages, no calls. Not yet. But she knew it was coming. At 00:20, her heart began to beat in time with the ticking wall clock. She stepped into the stairwell again, the smell of damp concrete wrapping around her. 00:23, the phone lit. Aisha, mobile. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She answered, static. Then that same metallic rainfall sound. Then a gasp, sharp and wet, like someone had been running. "Leena!" The voice broke. "He's..." A loud clatter cut the line, followed by a sound that wasn't quite thunder. Deeper, closer, like something hitting the ground hard. The call ended. Her own breath was ragged as she stared at the dead screen, the weight of the phone suddenly unbearable in her hand. The motorbike was waiting outside when she ended her shift. No pretense this time. The rider idled in full view across the street, helmet turned toward her. The black visor reflected the hospital lights, hiding everything but the intent. She turned and walked fast toward the station. The bike moved too, slow and deliberate, following along the parallel street. She didn't look back. Then headlights cut across her path, and the yellow cab slid to a stop just ahead. The passenger door swung open. "Get in," Robert said, his voice sharp in a way she hadn't heard before. She hesitated for half a second, then dove inside. The cab's tires hissed over wet asphalt as he pulled into traffic. In the side mirror, the motorbike turned down another street, vanishing between darkened shops. "Was that them?" Robert asked without looking at her. She nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. "They called again. Or Aisha did." Robert's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. "Your sister?" Leena swallowed. "She's been gone for months, missing. But I keep getting calls from her number. Every night. Same time. Last night she said not to trust someone. Tonight she broke off, the image of that clatter still in her mind. Robert was silent for a moment, the city sliding by outside, streaked with rain. "You ever think maybe someone's trying to scare you into something?" "Into what?" "That's what we need to figure out." He didn't drop her at her apartment. Instead, he drove towards Shinjuku, the cab weaving through side streets. Eventually, he pulled into the shadow of an old parking structure, killed the engine, and turned to face her. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "Not exactly this, but patterns. People being followed. Calls that don't make sense. Sometimes it's about money, sometimes about secrets." Leena stared at him. "And you just happened to drive past me every night?" Robert didn't flinch. "I was watching the motorbike, not you." The way he said it made her believe him, and not just because she wanted to. The phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Unknown number. Not Aisha's. Robert gestured for her to put it on speaker. She answered. "Hello?" Nothing. Just rain again. But this time, beneath it, voices, low, hurried, speaking Japanese too quickly for her to follow. Then a sharp intake of breath. Aisha's voice again, faint but desperate. "Leena, don't come!" A muffled shout. The line went dead. Leena's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone. Robert started the engine again. "We're not going to your place. Too easy to watch. I know somewhere better." They ended up in a narrow alley behind an all-night ramen shop. The smell of broth and grilled pork clung to the air, warm and strangely grounding. Robert led her to a small second-floor office above the shop. The kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Inside, it smelled of dust and old paper. A single desk, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard covered in maps and notes. Robert gestured to a chair. "You'll be safe here for a few hours. We need to figure out two things. Why those calls are coming now, and who's behind that bike." Leena sat, her damp coat clinging to her skin. "If Aisha's alive," Robert leaned forward, "then she's somewhere she can't leave, or someone doesn't want her to." The rain outside thickened again, drumming against the small window. In the shadows beyond, Tokyo blurred into a shifting watercolor of light and wet pavement. Somewhere out there, a motorbike engine started, and this time, it was close. The rain outside Robert's hideout was no longer a background hum. It was a wall of sound, like the city itself was trying to warn them. Leena sat rigid in the chair, her phone in one hand, eyes darting toward the window with every distant engine growl. Robert moved to the corkboard, flipping through pinned notes like a man searching for a memory. "I've seen this bike before," he said. "Same model, same rain poncho. He's not random. Whoever he is, he's circling you for a reason." "Then why not just confront me?" Leena asked, her voice sharper than she meant. "Why tail me for days? Why the calls?" "Because they want you afraid before they make their move." The sound of the motorbike came again. Closer now, reverberating off the wet alley walls. Robert's eyes narrowed. "Stay here." Before she could argue, he was gone, slipping down the narrow stairs to the street. Leena stood in the dim office, the air thick with the smell of dust and wet air from the half-open window. She peered through it, the rain blurring her vision. The bike was there, black helmet, rain poncho, engine idling like a heartbeat. Robert stepped into view, one hand up in a calm gesture. The rider didn't move. Rain sheeted off his helmet, making it impossible to read anything in his stance. Then with a sudden lurch, the bike roared forward. Not toward Robert, but toward the alley's end. Gone. Robert came back up the stairs, rain dripping from his hair. "He's not ready to be caught," he said, "which means he's planning something bigger." The clock on the wall read 11:58 p.m. Leena's stomach tightened. "It's almost time," she said. Robert glanced at the phone in her hand. This happens every night? Yes. Same time. Same number. Except sometimes it's not her number. When 0023 hit, the phone lit up. Aisha, mobile, Leena answered instantly. This time there was no rain sound, no static, just breathing. Aisha, the voice came soft, trembling. Leena, please listen. There? A sharp cry tore through the speaker, followed by a man's voice shouting in Japanese. Heavy footsteps. The sound of something falling. The line went dead. Robert's jaw tightened. That wasn't a recording. No, Leena whispered. She's alive. She has to be. They didn't wait. Robert's cab slid through Tokyo's wet streets like a yellow phantom, the wipers barely keeping up. Leena gripped the seat belt as the neon bled across puddles outside. Where are we going? She asked. The sound on that call, concrete echo, metal clatter, that's an old warehouse district by the docks. I've driven past it enough to know. Her pulse hammered. What if it's a trap? Robert gave a humorless smile. Then we walk in, prepared to spring it. The docks were nearly deserted, the rain turning the air briny and sharp. Old shipping containers loomed like sleeping giants, their metal sides streaked with rust. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn moaned. The motorbike was there, parked, engine off. Robert pulled the cab into the shadow of a container stack, killed the lights. Stay low, stay behind me, he said. They moved through the maze of containers, rain pattering like impatient fingers on steel. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound carried too far. Then from somewhere deeper in the yard, a muffled sound. A voice. Aisha, Leena breathed before she could stop herself. The sound drew them to a small storage building, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of oil and damp cardboard. She saw her before she believed it. Aisha. She was crouched against the far wall, wrists bound, hair matted, eyes wide with disbelief. Leena. Leena's legs moved before her mind caught up. She was halfway across the room when a shadow detached itself from the corner. The motorbike rider, helmet still on, but now close enough for Leena to see the faint fog of his breath through the visor. He stepped between the sisters, blocking her path. Robert's voice cut through the tension. Let her go. The rider didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and removed the helmet. Leena's breath froze. It wasn't a stranger. It was Detective Ishikawa, the same officer who had handled Aisha's missing person case, who had told Leena there were no leads, who had looked her in the eye and said, "You need to move on." Aisha's voice was hoarse. He's the one. Ishikawa stepped forward, rainwater dripping from his poncho onto the dusty floor. You shouldn't have kept asking questions, Leena. People disappear in this city all the time. It's easier when their families accept it. Robert shifted subtly, placing himself between Ishikawa and Leena. You've been following her to scare her off? Ishikawa smirked. Not scare. Convince. Fear makes people obedient, makes them forget. Leena's nails dug into her palms. Where were you taking her? Somewhere quieter, Ishikawa said simply. Where no one listens when it rains. The next moments blurred. Robert moved first, shoving Ishikawa back. The helmet clattered to the floor. A struggle broke out, sharp and messy, the sounds amplified in the small space. Leena dropped to her knees beside Aisha, fumbling with the knots around her wrists. The rope was rough, wet, biting into her skin as she pulled. A heavy thud made her look up. Robert and Ishikawa crashing into a metal shelf, boxes tumbling like thunder. The rope came loose. Go, Leena whispered, hauling Aisha to her feet. They ran into the rain, the cold shocking after the warehouse's closeness. Robert was right behind them, Ishikawa's shout chasing them into the maze of containers. They didn't stop until Robert's cab was in sight. Doors slammed, the engine roared, and the yellow blur shot into the wet darkness. Only when the city lights reappeared did Leena finally let herself believe Aisha was beside her, alive, shivering but breathing. Robert's hands gripped the wheel like it was the only thing holding him to the present. This isn't over, he said quietly. He's still out there. Leena looked at her sister, at the fear still trembling in her eyes, and knew he was right. because sometimes finding someone was only the beginning of losing them again. They didn't go back to Leena's apartment. They didn't go anywhere that felt like home. Robert drove until the city thinned, until the streets were lined with shuttered shops, and the only sound was the soft percussion of rain on the cab's roof. He stopped in front of a small business hotel, the kind rented by the night in cash, no questions asked. Aisha was asleep before they reached the room. It wasn't the deep, safe sleep of someone at peace, more like her body shutting down after running too long. Leena covered her with a thin blanket and sat by the window, staring at the rain-slicked parking lot below. Robert came in quietly, carrying 2 cans of coffee from the vending machine downstairs. He handed her one. "She'll need a hospital check," he said, "but we have to be smart. If Ishikawa has friends in the department, you walk in there with her, you might not walk back out." Leena nodded, the bitter coffee scalding her tongue. "You've dealt with people like him before." Robert leaned against the wall, his gaze somewhere far beyond the window. "I was a cop, a long time ago. Not here. Back in the States. Got too close to the wrong case, the wrong people. Learned that sometimes the badge doesn't mean what you think it does." She studied him for a long moment. "So why help me?" He met her eyes. "Because the night you first walked past my cab, you looked the way I did when I realized no one was coming to help me." At 0023, her phone rang. She froze. Robert's head snapped up. "Don't answer on speaker this time. Put it to your ear." Leena stepped into the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. Her hands shook as she lifted the phone. "Aisha." The voice that answered was faint, distorted, but it wasn't from tonight. She realized with a sudden chill that she'd heard this exact tone before. "Leena, I can't trust." Her own breath caught. This was the same call she'd heard 2 nights ago. Every pause, every intake of breath, identical. "Why are you—" she began, but the line cut off. When she stepped back into the room, Robert read the answer in her face. "It's a loop." Leena nodded slowly. "A recording, played over and over. But how—" Robert's gaze sharpened. "What's the date and time of the first missed call?" She scrolled back through her log. Her pulse slowed to a crawl. "The night she disappeared, 0023, and every night after." When Aisha woke, her voice was still hoarse, but she spoke with a clarity that made Leena's stomach twist. "They made me call you that first night. I didn't know where I was. They kept me in the dark. I told you not to trust anyone, but he—" She broke off, glancing at Robert. "He recorded it. Said it would keep you from talking to the police, that you'd be too scared to tell anyone." Leena's throat tightened. "And he played it back to me. Every night." Aisha nodded. "So you'd remember, but never act." Robert exhaled slowly. A control tactic. Make the threat feel alive without showing their hand. The next day was a blur of movement. Robert used contacts he still trusted. People who owed him favors. People who could hide Aisha somewhere. Ishikawa's reach wouldn't find her. Leena stood on a rooftop hours later, watching the wet city stretch away under a slate sky. The air smelled faintly of rust and rain. Robert stepped beside her. "She's safe," he said. "For now." Leena didn't look at him. "And Ishikawa?" He shook his head. "Too many friends in the department. He'll vanish for a while, maybe longer. But men like that, they don't forget loose ends." Her fingers curled on the railing. "I'm not going to live waiting for another engine to follow me home." Robert's mouth twitched into something between a smile and a warning. "Then we stop waiting." 2 weeks passed. The rain finally broke, leaving Tokyo washed in sharp winter light. The calls stopped. Leena went back to her shifts. Patients came and went. Hana complained about the vending machine coffee. Life settled into its fragile version of normal. But sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, she caught herself glancing at her phone, waiting for it to light up at 0023. It never did, until the night it did. She was walking home after a rare early shift, the streets damp but calm when the phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Aisha, mobile. 0023. Her chest constricted. She answered before she could think. Static. Then, not Aisha's voice. A man's, calm, familiar. You stop looking over your shoulder, Leena. That's good. Makes it easier. The line went dead. She stood in the middle of the wet street, the neon blurring in her vision, her own pulse loud in her ears. And somewhere, faint under the city's noise, an engine started.